My name is Dane Rose, and I want to welcome you to the Abuse Circle. And I'll begin by talking a little bit about how I came to create it. My particular pattern of abuse came at the nexus of suicide, overdose on psychedelics, sexual abuse by a therapist, and a shunning, shaming, blaming, isolating protocol to protect the abusive therapist by the colleagues and peers who had recommended the therapist, and a community that would not stand up for abuse. And this, in one form or another, touches on an ugly truth about our cult. And cult is at the root word of culture. And cult is the dogmatic status quo machine that has nothing to do with sanity, has nothing to do with science, has nothing to do with well-being. It's just a machine that perpetuates itself and gives a sense of normalcy. That's the price, is its absurdity. The gift, to the extent that there is one of normalcy. That we know what to expect. It may not be particularly pleasurable, intelligent, sane, or healing, but the same old thing tends to go on. And the first and most important thing I want to say is that this is not your wound. This is not your pain. Our cult has been producing large amounts of traumatic abuse, shame, abandonment, and grief. At the same time, it produces large numbers of people who do not know how to respond to it. So the cult produces victims and then produces people, a cult that doesn't know how to respond and repair the abuse. So the victims first internalize it and believe the lie, which is passed on in the abuse, which is that they are valueless. This is the underlying message of all abuse, because if you were valuable, why didn't your cult prevent it? Why didn't your cult respond? Why didn't your cult bother to invest in the R&D necessary to heal the wound that you're experiencing? And particularly the regressed nature of the trauma abuse survivor is one of a childlike consciousness in the face of an overwhelming force. And the child always makes everything about themselves. And so, as an abuse survivor goes through layer upon layer of abuse and no one responds, no one honors or grieves the wound, no one repairs the trauma, the abuse survivor internalizes the worthlessness, the rage, the hatred, the shame, and the ignorance of their cult. And filling and flooding with that rage, with that hatred, with that unregulated energy, then seeks a vessel to give the wound to. Sometimes not even identifying the wound as a wound, because in the layers of abuse, the cult's top defense against its own awareness of its own incompetence is the relabeling of the abuse as love, as beneficial, as necessary, as progress. And once that reverse move has been accomplished with cult brainwashing, all of the feelings of grief, rage, helplessness, and trauma are frozen and buried because they have no basis for existing within the nomenclature of the cult. Why would you be angry that someone loved you? Why would you be enraged that someone was doing something for your own good? Why would you hate those that just wanted you to grow up or that wanted you to move on? There's no basis for these feelings. And so the final kind of tap on the nail that punctures it all the way down below view is the lie that the abuse never happened, that this was necessary for your own good. And that's the first thing that has to be uncorked. Because particularly when you are a perpetrator of the disease, whatever the disease may be, if you have been brainwashed into believing that it was necessary or fine or no big deal, etc., in order to allow those around you to move on and not respond with the empathy, the compassion, and the technology necessary to heal the trauma, then what you give to others is also love, necessary, no big deal, for your own good, and something that they should move on from. In this way, an intergenerational abuse system is passed down from parent to child, from parent to child, from parent to child, generation after generation after generation, and it is not your wound. There is nothing wrong with you. You have been wronged. You have been fucked with. You have been given a burden that is too big for one individual alone to carry. And it is the burden of the cult's wound. Now, one of the most upsetting things about being laden with our cult's thick array of wounds is, of course, the outrage that we go through an education protocol that allows us to go from cradle to grave without understanding the scientific instrument of the human heart, without understanding the biology of trauma, without understanding the stages of grief and how to go through them, without developing relational literacy, without developing competent communication skills, in a profoundly violating and violent cult that demands these skills as a necessary first aid for the intense amounts of repeated abuse any member of the cult is likely to be given. So at the moment you're given an intense wound that is too much for you to bear, you are also given a circle of people who lack the competence, the paradigm, the empathy to respond effectively. And so there is a wounding again, another message. You were not valuable enough to protect from this wound. You weren't valuable enough to teach others how to heal and respond to this wound. You were not valuable enough to be invited back into sanity in the circle, in the community, by a group that is willing to name the pain, name the shame, name the violation, name the wound, and value you as a mirror, as one of the most important figures in the cult, the one who reveals the need for change, the need for healing, the need for evolution within the cult. The carriers of the disease that is given to you by your cult reveal the diseases of the cult, the inadequacies of the cult to respond and heal these diseases, and can start the dialogue, the feedback loop. However, in a shame-based, shadow-averse cult, images, stories, pictures of the insanity, the cruelty, and the inadequacy of the cult are not welcome. Because in a shame-based cult, every member of the cult feels secretly bad, secretly unlovable, and does not want their incompetence to be highlighted, does not want their cruelty, their sociopathic behavior, their stupidity, their insanity, their mismanagement of responsibility, power, and resources to be named, because in a shame-based cult, those who make mistakes are to be punished and to be blamed. In a shame-based cult capable of producing this amount of pain in so many millions of people, there is no one person to blame. It is a virus that Gary Slutkin, in his TED Talk around preventing violence, it is a virus that spreads through proximity as an ignorant and unhealed perpetrator who was once an ignorant and innocent victim passes the pattern on to a new ignorant and innocent victim who in time will infect others if the community does not respond to the circle with healing. At the time I was carrying the biggest load, I was persona non gratis. No one wanted to step up to the plate. And it's difficult to find resources when it is your therapists at the heart of the abuse. When you come from an abusive family, you can't go back to the family. And heaven help you if you are yet so innocent you have not grasped the cruelty, the ignorance, the sociopathic myopia of your government, and seek help there. And of your community members, most of them have little trauma training, little healing training, and have not broken out of the matrix of cult facade to start honoring the scientific possibility fields, the probability fields of our species, and how much our cults are pulling us down through group insane memes and identities that have nothing to do with the data and are just maintaining the monotony of a mediocre status quo. So, at the only time in my life when I really needed support, it wasn't there. There was less than there had ever been. Because in a cult that is so incompetent, it produces this wound again and again and again, often in its most vulnerable, in its women, in its children, in its elderly, and in the poor. In a sociopathic abuse dynamic, you abuse the people who can't fight back. It's cowardly, but crocodiles are cowards. If a crocodile wants lunch, and sees a couple and a 5-year-old boy wandering 15 feet behind as they go along the river, the alligator targets the 5-year-old. The reptilian brain, induced by repeated trauma without repair, preys on the sick, on the poor, on the young, on the elderly, on women, on anyone who won't fight back. That's what crocodiles do. It's the programming of the reptilian brain. Crocodiles are not also interested in healing or repair or vision. If you show up with excruciating needs in front of a crocodile, be it the reptilian brain in what was once a human being, or be it a lizard, they look at you and they realize this person cannot improve my gratification at this time. If I connect with them, they need something from me. I'm a reptile. It's not my problem. I'm not going to deal with it. Let me shame and blame the victim, anything to get them away, because it's more expedient for me not to do anything outside of the limited myopia of the ego. And by this method of abandoning and betraying the most vulnerable, we ensure that the most vulnerable become filled with hurt, hate, rage, betrayal, and cause tremendous damage to our culture, just as we as a cult caused tremendous damage upon them. And it is a form of self-hatred. It is a form of cruelty. It is a form of self-loathing and stupidity to participate unconsciously in this endless wheel. And it's why I'm making these videos, for you to honor you in the position of the one who is carrying not your wound, but our wound. A wound that our cult is capable of creating in millions of people, often repeatedly, and a wound it is not capable of healing in the vast majority of cases. As Einstein pointed out, the intelligence level of the person who creates the problem, who inflicts and allows the wound, is incompetent, is unable to heal the wound, to solve the problem that is created. It requires a new level of intelligence. And if you're not abused by a therapist, and you can rush off to a competent therapist, there is still something sociopathic about saying, since you had the great misfortune to be tagged, to be it, to be the carrier of our wound, which may make it hard for you to work, which may lead to fractious relationships with others who do not know how to honor the wound, which may knock you down financially and physically. That's the time when you need to pick yourself up and drive to a therapist who will charge you $100, $200, $300 an hour to further tap your resources. Your time off work, your time away from things, your driving, your wear and tear on your car, your trust. And it's often not enough. Talk therapy is inadequate, but talk therapists are often incompetent to recognize their inadequacy and refer you to a somatic healer. And of course, in this cult, you have not been prepared with the foreknowledge that you are going to urgently need a somatic healer that you deeply trust for these vulnerable moments. You may not even know they exist. And in a traumatically illiterate cult, your friends don't know either. And you can be given shaming and shameful advice again and again and again. You don't deserve to be hit with all of these problems and the tax. And in our culture, it's a literal tax. Our most vulnerable abuse survivors are going to suffer physically, take time off work, which in a reptilian paradigm results in them being fired. Because if you're sick, like Amazon if you're sick for more than 6 days, it doesn't matter you're fired. In a reptilian capitalist framework, when you need help the most, the banks won't loan you money, you'll get fired, and it's left to you to repair the problems given to you by your cult. This is cruel and idiotic. It's cruel to you, but it is equally cruel to the cult. Because this takes hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. More people die in suicide than die in traffic accidents. Mortality rates are on the decline. Because when you give hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people a year this level of pain, with a completely inadequate set of toolkits to respond to it, and a circle of reptiles around them who shame and isolate until the person agrees to bury the wound and pretend it doesn't exist. We create traumatic contagion. We create a contagion of shame. We create a contagion of the underlying disease, which is helplessness, because no one will help, and worthlessness, because no one will fight as an adult for the dignity, for the beauty, for the honor of the recipient of the abuse or the abuser. It is not human nature to abuse. It is crocodile nature for sure. But if your cult does not persist in a sustained barrage of trauma, our infants do not go back 200 million years and start working with the reptilian brain and a dull protocol of fight, freeze, flight, and fawn. We become empathic human beings. It takes a lot of trauma. It takes a lot of shame. It takes a lot of cruelty. It takes a lot of pain to be so unbearable that human beings regress 200 million years into the past to fight a sociopathic environment with a reptilian brain that was designed to survive amongst sociopaths. That's what reptiles are. So, nobody wins when you're asked to carry this load. Nobody wins when you become 1 in 7 Americans to develop chronic substance addiction. Nobody wins when your joy, your innocence, and your beauty, which was there before it was taken away from you, gets buried by the machine of a cult with more interest in perpetuating itself than in caring for its people. No one wins. You don't win. I don't win. The abuser doesn't win. The cult doesn't win. Everyone loses. Now, this circle is inadequate. It is absolutely inadequate to give you all that you need. But one of the most difficult things that I went through in this domain was the isolation. The fact that in 45 years on this planet, no adult had ever said, had ever revealed, had ever honored my value by pausing to tell me even the rudimentary elements about traumatic response and how to respond to those reactions. That human feelings are part of a scientific instrument called the heart. That you can learn about your environment based on the feelings that are produced by that environment. It's one of the reasons our cult is so committed to shaming and silencing so many feelings. They don't care about you in particular, but if you look deeply at the feelings of an individual, particularly an individual in the wound, what you see is the inextricable connection between the feelings produced by the wound in the body and the cruelty and ineptitude that produces those feelings in the cult. If you look carefully at the disease in the individual, you see the disease in the cult. And this is something, much like the resistance of every child, to seeing the innate failings of their parents. The child blames themselves and turns their parents into deities. The child blames themselves for every cruelty, every wrong, every trauma inflicted on them by their parents, translating that into "I'm not lovable," rather than that these individuals raised in an abuse cult do not know how to love, do not know what love is, do not know that love is a process from the feminine spontaneous feeling of love, of attraction, to loving enough to care, to caring enough to seeing enough to understand enough to empathize enough to attune to the other, to attune enough to succeed at participating in the increased survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, development of talents and gifts, connection and integration of those gifts into community and transcendence, to participate in the meeting of another's core needs. The hierarchy of human needs, a concept largely pioneered by Abraham Maslow. This is what it is to love. If you do not feel you belong, if you do not feel seen, if a person's actions are decreasing your ability to meet your own human needs, let alone be helped, you are not being loved. You are being abused in a cult that has its language confused and does not care enough about itself to untangle the knot, does not believe in itself enough to face the truth, does not understand itself enough to see its own shadow, dark and light, its possibilities and its repressed lies. But this cult needs you. It needs you to heal. It needs you to speak. It needs you to grow. It needs you to learn how to be the adult it is incapable of being for you. It needs the impossible to shower you with pain, trauma, shame, ignorance, and incompetence since birth, to punish you for revealing the pain of that wound, to humiliate you for being devastated by that wound, to patronize and humiliate your feminine side. And having knifed you in every possible way, with every instrument of torture, your cult waits to see, can you survive? It's been interesting watching Elon Musk over the last 10 years or so. The amount of cruelty, the highest shorted stock in the market. One expert after another. Oh, SpaceX can't succeed. Tesla can't succeed. They're going to fail. They're going to go bankrupt. Everyone ganging up on a visionary leader. We only produced one Elon Musk out of hundreds of millions of people. Now, there were plenty of people that wanted to be an Elon Musk, an innovator, etc. But they just couldn't stand the amount of pain that we dished out at them, the amount of sociopathic cruelty, the ganging up, the exploitation. They couldn't take the 100-hour weeks. So they gave up. Our cult killed off 99% of the innovation. And then a few people with unusually high pain tolerances pushed through and gave our cult a gift. Whether it was the smartphone or Model 3s or the prospect of becoming interplanetary or tunnels that can relieve traffic, our cult attacks us with everything it's got. And this is, in a sense, a test to see, do you know something we don't know? Because if you have the same level of intelligence as your cult, you will crash and burn. And your life will become a fear-based effort to not get too high to get knocked and make it through the day. But a rare individual, we've got one Elon Musk. We're pretty efficient at killing them off. There are very few truth tellers about abuse, about trauma, about sexual exploitation. And the cult is waiting to see, can you make it through its cruelty to become a leader? Because that's what you do. Once the cult throws every bit of ammunition at you it possibly can, hoping you'll go away and it won't have to think or grow up or change, if you still survive, it gives you a grudging acknowledgement that it couldn't kill you off. And if you start thriving on the other side, well, then it's all over you. You know, as Elon Musk makes it through the, these narrows and all the negative, this and that, and gossip, and, hammering him at multiple points as he's working 100-hour weeks, then suddenly they like him. Our cult likes the winners who can withstand the 100,000 knives that it will throw at you, because it doesn't know what it's doing. And it's interested in people who do. And by definition, you have to survive the knives, the gunfire, the cruelty, the gossip, in order to demonstrate that you have something to say that it's interested in hearing. Because every single member of an abuse cult, the victims, the perpetrators, the witnesses that are standing by, is terrified of the next round of abuse and is wanting to know, how can I win in an environment that's this incompetent, that's this ignorant? And the cult has no answers. And so you're out on the fringe. Trauma plunges you into the unknown. The unknown is 99.9% of all reality. 99.9% of all reality is not only unknown, it's unknown that it's unknown. And trauma shoots part of your body, part of your consciousness through the dissociation of shock out into some of that mystery. And it is sheer hell and sheer terror. But while you're out there, a certain percentage of us are going to see things we didn't see before. And this, in Joseph Campbell's words, is the hero's journey. The hero's journey out into the unknown, outside the bounds of safety, with high probability of death, but a probability of some level, depending on your skill, the degree you keep your wits about you, a probability that you may stagger back half dead and bring with you a treasure that this cult needs and is too cowardly and incompetent to go and get on its own. So it sends its vulnerable out into the traumatic realms of the invisible, of the inner world, of the mystery. And some come back with gifts. I don't think it's right that we try and exploit and make money from people in this vulnerable terrain. These are the people on a hero's journey with our wound, taking it into the unknown, who are asked to carry the worthlessness, the cowardice of our stupidity as we shun and shame these journeys, not honoring them with initiation, not honoring them with spiritual guidance, not honoring them with any psychological competency or technology. We stack the deck against the individuals we most need to succeed if we are going to grow and evolve as a species. Now, I felt that loneliness. I felt that rage. I felt that hate, and I felt that hurt and grief. Because everyone loses with this protocol. Everyone loses. And the most vulnerable people and the most valuable people at the most sensitive stage of their lives, who could bring back the most change and the highest gifts to our cult, are instead asked to believe the lie, which is that they are garbage that has nothing to offer and are to be avoided until they start becoming normal and adopt the idiotic memes of an abuse cult. The last thing you need when being thrust into traumatic terrain in the unknown is to be asked to believe a pack of lies for the expediency of the liars who lack the training, who lack the psychological competency to even know the levels of their own stupidity. As Nassim Taleb pointed out in The Black Swan, The incompetent lack the competency to assess their own incompetence. Only a highly competent individual, which in our cult is a minority, has the technology to discern between who does and doesn't have competency in a given field. The top 5% in a given technology have the competency to accurately rank the other 95%. The bottom 50% have no idea how competent or incompetent they are in most cases, particularly dealing with psychological terrain. This is, by its nature, a terrifying and lonely journey. And there were voices that I stumbled across in this swell, in these high seas of biology, of psychology, of terror. There were voices, Robert Bly, Marion Woodman, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Brené Brown. There were voices that helped establish and map out some of this unknown terrain so that I could come back, which is still a process for me. One of the reasons that this will be an inadequate product that does not do you justice is that I am not healed. I lack the maturity, I lack the understanding, I lack the pain tolerance, and I lack an accurate map capable of fully integrating and healing the large amounts of pain, shame, and trauma that have been given to me. But I wanted to give something as a gift for you. I wanted to be a voice that said, no, you should not be asked in your most vulnerable time to pay people who are primarily there for the money and who may or may not know what they're talking about. You should have the support of your community. My belief is that you need a group of 5 or more people. And the less you know about trauma and support, the bigger your group needs to be. But that you need 5 or more people so that they won't drown with you as you spread the load between your circle of support. And you need to go through a protocol. And I'm willing to be asked by you to be one of 5 or more. I've got way too much on my plate to carry an individual because no one is carrying me. And I'm still sorting this through. But it would be an honor to be one of a group to honor you through a time that was never supposed to be like this, that you don't deserve, but are given, a wound that you are given, not because there's anything particularly wrong with you, but because this cult does not know how to dish out anything else. I believe that you and how you navigate this have a tremendous impact on the future of this planet. And particularly, if you'd like to participate in the 180, which is a difficult thing to pull off in a cult that's trying to bury and hide and shame you. But in the 180, the cult wants to say you're garbage. And all that means, by the way, is that the cult has impacted you in a way that produces a pattern of energy that it lacks the competency and sophistication to do anything valuable with. In America, on a per capita basis, by the time you and I die, there will be 102 tons of garbage in a landfill. Meaning our culture, for a 200-pound body, will produce over 100 tons of energy, natural resources that have been turned into energy patterns that it doesn't know what to do with. And rather than admit its incompetence and its stupidity and say, this is not garbage, but we sure are producing a lot of stuff that we don't know what to do with. We're taking a lot of nature and we're turning it into things that we lack the imagination to reintegrate into the ecology. So we're calling it garbage rather than calling our paradigm absurd. It's part of the shame dumping. You can acknowledge the stupidity of the cult that produces more energy, more garbage, than any other cult in human history, per capita. More stuff it doesn't know what to do with. That's not intelligence. That's not progress. And it's doing it with human beings as well. So to make that 180 turn and be a teacher is a severe pivot. It's a difficult maneuver in a cult that's knocking you off balance every step of the way. But you're welcome to join me in this circle and in the larger body of work that I'm developing around this, because I believe that the single biggest pivot in whether the species transcends its own dogmas and survives, or grabs onto its dogmas and destroys itself, is with how much intelligence and grace it handles this terrain that you and I are in. And it's doing a terrible job. It has nothing to do with your value. It's not your wound. But you are carrying it for all of us. And this circle is an effort to be something, a companion, a voice that was not there for me, that made it harder in the silence to figure out what was going on. So hopefully, this will make it a little bit easier for you.